Dear friends, today I just want to talk about one issue, which is the science of public health, infectious disease, which is not known within the public health community and therefore obviously not known to the wider community. In fact, I'm discovering it only now after 3 years of having been involved with COVID and the tons of readings that I've done. It's only been now that I've been able to assemble it together in my head. So what I'm going to say is actually quite interesting, and hopefully it'll prompt some, thoughts from your end. So think about the borders. I've talked about this index case problem earlier, but let's go back to Donald Henderson's findings, which, by the way, were confirmed by Professor Thomas Mack, who's at the University of Southern California and who worked with Donald Henderson and wrote the 2 articles that I've cited in my recent Times of India blog post. One in 1972 by Thomas Mack, another in 1974 by Donald Henderson himself. These 2 articles looked at how smallpox had, the cases of smallpox in Europe for around 20 years in the 1960s, 50s and 60s. And what they found is that except for a couple of cases which were detected on the board of ships and so on. So, people were then quarantined. Almost all the cases, and that's probably about 95 to 98% of the cases of smallpox that entered into Europe came from people who could not be detected at the border. And so then they spread the, smallpox within the European nations. And so you'd ask, why did the border control people not check these guys for smallpox? Well, the answer is something so simple and intuitive once you think about it, that it will then translate into a lot many more things. But just think about it for a second, because Donald Henderson didn't really explain it very clearly in his talks and other things, and I've sort of figured it out from trying to understand how it works. And the answer is that smallpox has a gestation period of 12 days, roughly. It can be 7 days in some cases and a bit more in other cases, like 14 or 15 days in other cases, an average of 12 days. So during the 12 days, somebody could be carrying smallpox, but they neither know that they're carrying smallpox, they have no symptoms, or they're starting to develop symptoms, okay? So now you're in the 12-day window. Now what happens is that if you have the symptoms, you have very high fever, then what you're going to do? You're not going to travel, but definitely not by air. I mean, you might travel by ship. You got caught in the ship, and so you hang on for some time. But if you are traveling by air, you'll cancel your plans, right? So it's a self-selection effect, and people, therefore, who are traveling are almost all of them, particularly by air, are almost all of them asymptomatic, but they're carriers. So they're carrying the smallpox, right? So they go through the border because they themselves don't know about it. There is no symptom and there's no potential check or test that can detect it. So they go through. And once they go through, then the thing spreads. Now, once you understand this, then I think everything else flows very simply from that. It's a very simple process after that, okay? Now you got the point, right? So that you cannot stop a virus simply because it has got a gestation period. It is pre-symptomatic. There may be minor symptoms. There may be, by the way, smallpox itself has symptoms which are very similar to that of other viruses, like some high fever and so on. And so you don't think and don't compare with, you might think it's a common cold or something, right? Anyway, the net result is that border controls, they do not work. Now, if border controls don't work, then border closures don't work. Because the other thing that comes with closures is that if you close a border completely and tight seal with nothing coming in and nothing going out, etc., permanently, no trade with anybody else, you completely seal off for the next 5 million years. Why million years? Because the virus is not going to be eradicated from the planet. It's going to hang on. It could be, except for smallpox, virtually no virus can ever get eradicated. Therefore, you're going to stop it at a high cost, which is an infinite cost practically for your nation. And that doesn't work. So border closures, border, checking, they simply don't work. So what does it mean for lockdowns? What is a lockdown? A lockdown is actually a border closure. It's an internal border closure. You're basically closing off, your 5-kilometer zone, or you're closing off your school, or you're closing off your, house, or you're closing off your hospital, or whatever. You're closing off something, right? And so people who are closing off, they're moving across that internal border. The essential workers, the people who are doing the retail, the people who are doing the emergency services, they're going through, etc., and they're going home. So now what do you have? You have that virus fellow, in this case COVID, being transmitted up and down all these people to hospitals, to homes, to markets, emergency services, etc. And it's happening because it cannot be detected, because the person who has got it is not showing any symptoms. Okay, and so they might be just starting to show the thing, and you never know when exactly the virus has reached the point when it's now going to start spreading, and earlier it was not. And so the person doesn't know himself or herself. So how could he possibly, stop doing their essential activity? The other point that Paul Frijters mentioned was so basic point that, I don't understand why no one in public health has even thought about it. He says that in a hunting-gathering society, you actually live in groups and so on. You're quite isolated. And so you can have a lockdown. Okay, you can actually seal off everything because you're in a separate place. You grow your own food. You go to your own little witch doctor for your, medicine or whatever. You don't go to hospitals. And so that is fine. You can have lockdowns, total lockdowns. And of course, it won't really eradicate the virus, so it's a useless idea. But let's say that you can have a total lockdown. What Paul Frijters is saying is that you can't have a total lockdown in a modern industrial society because people don't grow their own food. They need to get food from somewhere. Then there's the gardener, the cleaner, the driver, the blah, blah, everything. And then they have to go to hospital, particularly the elderly and sick people go to hospital. So it's a complete mess. Yeah, virus is being transmitted in a hidden manner, which no one can actually no one can know. The point is not just that, you don't know as a person, but no one else can know. And it's essentially impossibility. The period of transmission, the window of transmission of a virus is simply beyond any human's capacity to know. Therefore, lockdowns are exactly the same situation as we had Donald Henderson had explained for the smallpox virus. Nothing, not a single lockdown can ever stop the virus from transmitting, number one. And number two, as we saw with Paul Frijters' additional insight, that particularly in an industrial society where hospitals themselves become the transmission centers of viruses, when elderly, being less immune, they go and then die because of that virus. So this is how, we basically end up with a failed project. The entire idea, this is, by the way, known as science. Why? Because it actually understands the entire mechanics of a particular issue. And so from the start of the smallpox all the way, how it transmits, borders can't control, blah, blah, blah. We've ended with the case of COVID. We see that it can't be done. So this is pure science. What I'm talking now is pure science. I'm not doing a cost-benefit analysis, okay? Just keep in mind, this is the pure scientific description. And so the other implication, which is something which is even more dramatic, I would say, given that I myself was promoting the age-based risk management, which basically says people at the ages of 70, 80 should be protected or isolated. Others can carry on their normal life, etc., etc. So that is also called, that was a part of the pandemic plan of Victoria, but also became famous as the Great Barrington Declaration. I'm sorry to say that is also wrong. So basically, we've all got it wrong. Why? For the same reasons, the two, Donald Henderson reason and the Paul Frijters reasons. These two things, the idea that you can isolate the elderly and that they will not catch the virus is an impossibility. They've got to eat and they have to go to hospital. Two things that the elderly have to do. Most of them are under some sort of treatment or the other. They require to go to hospitals. They catch the disease there. You can't stop it. It's like impossible. You have to feed them. Somebody has to, you can't feed them with those scuba suits or whatever, the suits which are like spacecraft. You can't do that. And so they will also get the virus. In fact, they have almost all, in all cases, the aged care centers, they got the virus very quickly. And of course, the elderly died. Well, they were almost ready to go. I mean, I wouldn't mind dying if I'm over 80 years of age. Well, that's a long, good life. So those are the people who died. And that's, I'm not going to say that is a universal phenomena. In some virus pandemics, it'll be the young people who die, which is quite a big issue. But nevertheless, you can't stop the virus in this manner. The Great Barrington Declaration is therefore wrong. And therefore we come to, and then of course, the other problem was the masks. And, I was a great proponent of masks and I was wrong on that, right? I've been wrong on so many things. And so this was another one which I was wrong on. And I can conclusively say that masks did not, reduce the COVID at all. And in fact, they definitely increased COVID. So, and they increased, and then they caused vastly greater number of harms. So they are leaky masks. So we have a leaky border closure, a leaky border checking, a leaky lockdown, leaky masks, leaky contact tracing, everything leaks. And when you're having a leaking system, from your roof, the leak is coming, your house is wet anyway. It doesn't matter, whether you are, it's a big leak or a small leak, you are getting wet and you are transmitting. And this is a virus. It doesn't just stay like a water drop in a particular puddle. It spreads everywhere. Okay. So let's be very clear. The science on this is now conclusive. There are a few viruses like Ebola. And Ebola is very unique, and smallpox is pretty unique, that it would only or largely transmit only when symptomatic, when extremely symptomatic, let's say. And in such a case, you should isolate the person. The person himself or herself would want to get isolated in the first place. But if the person doesn't want to do it, then the police power can be applied and, quarantine can be done or something like that. But I'll come to that separately. But the point is that except for that particular kind of a virus and something like, STD, for which you need contact tracing and it can be of some help, etc. Except for these few things, there is no need for border checking, quarantine, or contact tracing either. So the first thing is you need to ban border closures, border checking in general, not as a general rule. And then you should, you shouldn't be doing border checking generally. So in specific cases, you might want to do some checks. But otherwise, things of this sort need to be banned. And you also need to, be banning the masks and things of the sort. So what are we left with? What are we left with? We're left with simply ourselves. We are left with ourselves because we've evolved over the course of millions of years, and I go back in time is hundreds of millions of years. If you start digging up, into the prehistory of man, we have 8% of our body comprises, the DNA comprises, it's built from viruses. So we've been accumulating stuff from on this planet Earth, and that's all built into the body. So we are very sturdy. The fact that we've survived up to this point means that we are pretty sturdy as a species. And so we need to depend on ourselves. We need to build our own immune system. We need to build our, get infected by smaller minor viruses like Sunetra Gupta talks about. And so once we have that infection, which builds our immunity, we get sunlight, we get vitamin D, we get all the other, good things and nutrients. We are in a better position to defend ourselves, but we must not forget, and I'm not forgetting, no one should forget, we are all mortal, okay? So one fine day, our immune system will stop being very effective. One fine day, we will catch some disease. One fine day, we may get cancer and heart disease or something else or whatever. And one fine day, we are dead. So the idea that we have to stop living, we have to cut down our quality of life for the sake of something that is inevitable. So we see the spread of the virus is absolutely inevitable. Need to understand this, need to get this inside our head. The airborne viruses are inevitable. We should not stop them. The cost is enormous, and I'm not going to count the cost at the moment. What I'm saying is it's an impossibility. When you do a thing that is impossible, you are known as insane. And so I would recommend that anyone watching this, stop insanity. Above all, be sane, okay? Once you're sane, you can do other things with your life. You can actually take some precautions, go in a jungle, whatever you want to do, but be happy. If you want to live life not as a happy person, but always scared, wearing a mask, living a kind of a fear-born life, you're not living as a human being, you're living as some animal. And I think that's not worth it. It's better to have, to as they say, to stand and, on your feet than to live on your knees. So, don't be cowardly. Don't be afraid of every single thing. Yes, death is going to happen and death will come. Some will die sooner, some will die later. But no, we don't want lockdowns. We don't want border closures. We don't want things that are impossible. Now, look, if they were possible, if there was a science behind it, I might have actually said, yeah, let's do it. I'm not against anything which really works, even though it might, restrict my freedom. I'm willing to give it a go if it actually works and provides a net benefit to society. But it's an impossibility. And therefore, we simply cannot have it. So this was I guess, a summary of my recent findings. I'm sorry about, the Great Barrington Declaration, but I must say that also was wrong, unfortunately. All right. Thank you, everybody.